My mom ignored me for years, declared my stepsister her only daughter at her gala, so I exposed the truth. What happened next left the room in shock. I'm Dana, by the way, and my mom, Caroline, has spent years making me feel like an afterthought while putting my stepsister, Sabrina, on a pedestal. Now, don't get me wrong, Sabrina isn't a bad person, she's just oblivious. She's the perfect daughter in Mom's eyes. She's got the looks, the charm, and the ability to show up at events in designer clothes and act like she's saving the world. Meanwhile, I'm the one who's actually doing the work. I'm in the office late at night, managing the logistics and finances for the nonprofit, while Sabrina gets all the credit for representing the mission. The nonprofit is supposed to be about empowering women and creating opportunities for those who need them the most. On the surface, it's all shiny and impressive. Gala donor dinners, check presentations. But I've always felt like it's less about helping people, and more about giving Mom an excuse to rub elbows with wealthy socialites. Still, I thought at least some of the money must be going to good causes, right? Oh, I was dead wrong. It all started with me working late one night, like usual. I was going over the quarterly budget, double-checking some numbers for a report. That's when I noticed it, this massive expense marked as administrative costs. It didn't make sense. I mean, I know events can be expensive, but this number was ridiculous. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars that didn't seem to match up with anything I'd seen before. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe someone had mislabeled a donation or misfiled an expense. It happens. But the more I looked into it, the weirder it got. There were charges for luxury vacations, high-end jewelry, private jets, things that had absolutely nothing to do with the nonprofit's mission. I kept digging, and that's when I saw his name, Jared. Jared is Sabrina's boyfriend, a guy I've never trusted. He's slick, always dressed like he's walking into a GQ photo shoot, and somehow manages to worm his way into every conversation at family events. He's one of those guys who talks a lot without actually saying anything, you know the type. Anyway, turns out Jared wasn't just Sabrina's boyfriend, he was also siphoning money out of the nonprofit's accounts. That's right, Jared was using donor money to fund his ridiculous lifestyle. He'd set up fake invoices and business accounts to make it look legitimate, but the transactions were clearly personal. We're talking luxury cars, a penthouse apartment, and even a massive chunk of change funneled into his failing tech startup. And here's the part that really made my stomach turn, my mom was signing off on all of it. At this point, I was furious. I mean, I've always known my mom favors Sabrina. It's been that way for as long as I can remember. Growing up, Sabrina could do no wrong. If she got a participation ribbon at school, Mom acted like she just won a Nobel Prize. Meanwhile, I could be pulling straight A's and it was just expected. But this wasn't just favoritism. This was theft. And not just theft, it was theft from people who genuinely needed help. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I sat there for hours, going through every file, every transaction, every document I could find. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Jared had been on the payroll for consulting services, even though he didn't do anything. Mom had approved countless fake expenses under his name, and the money wasn't going anywhere near the programs we were supposed to be funding. By the time I closed my laptop, I felt like I didn't even know who my mom was anymore. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the sheer audacity of it all. She wasn't just complicit, she was orchestrating the whole thing. And Sabrina? At first, I thought she had to be in on it. I mean, how could she not know? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Jared was probably using her too. She was just a convenient cover, a way to make it all look legitimate. And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife even deeper, Mom announced the gala. She called a family dinner to make the big reveal, gushing about how proud she was of Sabrina and how the event would celebrate her contributions. I just sat there staring at her, wondering if she even remembered I existed. Sabrina's contributions? What contributions? Sabrina doesn't even know how the nonprofit operates. Her contribution is showing up at events in a designer dress and smiling for the cameras. Meanwhile, I'm the one handling the spreadsheets, writing the grant proposals, and making sure the lights stay on. But apparently, none of that matters. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up right there at the dinner table and tell everyone what I'd found. But I didn't, not yet. Instead, I forced a smile and pretended to be happy for Sabrina. I needed more time to figure out what to do next. I wasn't just going to let this slide. If Mom wanted to throw Sabrina a party and pretend I didn't exist, fine. But I wasn't going to sit there quietly and watch her get away with this. The thing is, after uncovering the mess Mom and Jared had made of the nonprofit, I knew I couldn't handle this on my own. The scale of what they were doing was way beyond anything I'd ever dealt with. Sure, I'd managed budgets and tracked finances for years, but this wasn't just some misplaced decimal point or a questionable purchase. This was full-blown fraud. The first person I thought to tell was Eric, my coworker. Eric's been working with me at the nonprofit for a few years, mostly in grant writing and program management, but he's also one of the few people I trust completely. He's sharp, no nonsense, and not afraid to call things out when they're wrong. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it was him. I caught him in his office the next morning. "Got a minute?" I asked, shutting the door behind me. "Sure," he said, looking up from his laptop. "You look stressed." "That's putting it lightly," I said, dropping a thick folder onto his desk. "You're not going to believe this." Eric started flipping through the papers, his eyebrows furrowing with every page. By the time he got to the end, he looked up at me with this incredulous expression. "Dana, this isn't just sketchy, this is criminal." "Exactly," I said, "and it gets worse. Those accounts? They're all tied to Jared." Eric leaned back in his chair, letting out a low whistle. "Of course they are. That guy gives me bad vibes every time he shows up here. And you're saying your mom's approving all this?" "Every single transaction," I said. "Her signature's on everything." Eric shook his head. "This isn't just turning a blind eye. She's actively helping him. She's part of it." Hearing him say it out loud made it all feel even more real. Up until that moment, part of me had been hoping I was wrong, that maybe there was some explanation I hadn't thought of. But there wasn't. Mom was in this up to her neck, and Jared was just as bad, if not worse. "What do you want to do?" Eric asked, his tone serious now. "I need to figure out just how far this goes," I said, "and I need your help." He nodded without hesitation. "I'm in." From that moment on, Eric became my partner in unraveling the tangled web of lies Mom and Jared had created. We spent every spare moment digging through financial records, emails, and contracts. The deeper we went, the more disturbing it got. Jared wasn't just using the nonprofit's funds to live a lavish lifestyle. He was pouring a huge chunk of it into a failing tech company under his name. It was one of those startups that sounds impressive on paper but doesn't actually do anything. According to the records, he'd been using the nonprofit's money to keep the company afloat, paying salaries to employees who didn't exist and inflating the company's value to attract investors. It was a house of cards, and the nonprofit was the foundation holding it all up. "What's even the end game here?" I asked Eric one afternoon as we sifted through another stack of documents. "Does he think no one's going to notice?" Eric shrugged. "Guys like Jared never think they're going to get caught. They rely on people not paying attention, and honestly, most people wouldn't. If you weren't handling the finances, this probably would have gone unnoticed for years." He wasn't wrong. The nonprofit's financials were complicated, and most of the board members didn't have the time or the expertise to dig into the details. Mom had surrounded herself with people who trusted her completely, and she used that trust to get away with everything. By the end of the week, Eric and I had pieced together a pretty damning case. We'd found emails between Mom and Jared discussing how to label certain expenses to avoid scrutiny. There were fake invoices for consulting services that Jared had submitted, along with receipts for things like luxury vacations and designer clothes. And then there was the money going to his tech company, a massive amount that was impossible to justify. "This guy is a fraud," Eric said as we stared at the spreadsheet on his laptop. "And your mom is his accomplice. They've been working this scam for years." Hearing it laid out so plainly made my stomach turn. I'd always known my mom was ambitious, but this wasn't ambition. This was greed. And the worst part was that she was using Sabrina as a pawn to keep the charade going. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Sabrina was being used as the face of the nonprofit, the golden child who gave everything credibility. Jared was dating her for the same reason. She was a shield, someone they could point to whenever anyone asked questions. "Sabrina has no idea, does she?" Eric asked. "None," I said. "She probably thinks Jared's a great guy and that Mom's just trying to help him get his company off the ground." Eric shook his head. "That poor girl. She's going to be devastated when she finds out." I didn't have the heart to tell him that Sabrina and I weren't exactly close. We'd grown up in the same house, but we might as well have been strangers. Mom had always pitted us against each other, and Sabrina had bought into it completely. She didn't see me as a sister, she saw me as competition. But even so, she didn't deserve this. Nobody did. As Eric and I worked late into the night, I couldn't help but wonder how far Mom and Jared were willing to go. Were they planning to expand their scheme? Would they drag the entire nonprofit down with them if it meant keeping their lavish lifestyle intact? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let them get away with it. By the time we wrapped up for the night, we had enough evidence to blow the whole thing wide open. But I wasn't ready to go public just yet. I needed to figure out the right time and place to confront them, and I needed to make sure I had backup when I did. "What's the plan?" Eric asked as we packed up our things. I thought about the gala Mom was planning, the event where she planned to honor Sabrina and pretend everything was perfect. It was going to be full of donors, board members, and press, All the people who'd been funding the nonprofit without knowing where their money was really going. The gala, I said. That's when we do it. Eric raised an eyebrow. You sure? Absolutely, I said. If Mom wants to play favorites, fine. But she's not going to like how this plays out. As I walked out of the office that night, I felt a mix of anger, determination, and something else, maybe a little hope. For the first time in years, I felt like I had the upper hand. Mom and Jared thought they were untouchable, but they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The week of the gala, everything felt tenser than usual. Mom was buzzing with excitement, going full-on control freak over the smallest details. Invitations had been sent out to every influential donor, politician, and business person she could think of. It wasn't just about celebrating Sabrina. It was about showing off the nonprofit's power and reach. To her, this event was a chance to secure even more clout. I was doing my best to keep my head down, pretending I wasn't onto her and Jared's scheme. Every time I saw her, I had to fight the urge to throw the evidence in her face, but I knew I had to play it cool. If she got even a whiff of what I was planning, she'd shut it all down before I could expose her. Then, out of nowhere, Sabrina called me. That alone was weird. We're not exactly close, and she's not the kind of person to just check in. Hey Dana, she said, her voice quieter than usual. Do you have a second? Sure, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. What's up? There was a pause, and for a moment, I thought she might back out of whatever she wanted to say. Then she sighed. I don't know, something feels off. This caught me off guard. Sabrina's never been one to question anything, especially when it comes to Mom or Jared. She's always played the role of the golden child perfectly, smiling through every event, parroting whatever Mom wanted her to say. What do you mean? I asked, genuinely curious. Jared's been acting weird, she said, distant, distracted, and Mom's been all over him about some big announcement they're planning for the gala. Every time I ask about it, they brush me off. I feel like I'm missing something. I had to physically stop myself from blurting out the truth right then and there. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. She let out another sigh. Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Do you think Jared might be hiding something? Oh, Sabrina, if only you knew. I think it's worth paying attention to, I said carefully. You know, asking questions, seeing how they react. If Jared's acting different, there's probably a reason. She was quiet for a moment. You're right. Thanks, Dana. When she hung up, I just sat there staring at my phone. For the first time, I felt like Sabrina might not be as complicit as I'd thought. Maybe she really was just a pawn in their game. But that didn't make her any less of a problem. Whether she knew it or not, she was the face of their entire operation, the shiny distraction they used to keep everyone from looking too closely. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as everyone prepared for the gala. Mom was in full event planner mode, barking orders at the staff and obsessing over every tiny detail. Sabrina, on the other hand, seemed different. She wasn't her usual confident, carefree self. She looked distracted, like she had something on her mind. At one point, I caught her staring at Jared during a planning meeting. He was busy schmoozing with a donor, his charm dialed up to 11, as always. But Sabrina wasn't smiling. She looked almost suspicious. Later that afternoon, she cornered me in the break room. Have you noticed anything weird about Jared lately? She asked. I played dumb. Like what? I don't know, she said, frowning. He's been spending a lot of time on his phone, taking calls in private, and every time I ask what he's up to, he gets defensive. I shrugged. Maybe he's just stressed. The gala is a big deal. She didn't look convinced. Maybe. But it's not just him. Mom's been acting weird too. She's been pushing me to rehearse this speech for the gala, but she won't tell me what it's about. She just keeps saying it'll be a big moment. My stomach churned. I had no doubt that big moment was going to involve some kind of announcement to legitimize their scheme. They were probably planning to use Sabrina to pitch their fake projects to the donors, making her the face of the scam without her even realizing it. Have you tried asking Mom directly? I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. Sabrina rolled her eyes. You know how she is. Everything has to be a surprise and she gets all defensive if I push too hard. But I don't like it, Dana. Something about this doesn't feel right. For the first time, I saw a crack in Sabrina's perfect facade. She wasn't just the golden child anymore. She was starting to question things. Look, I said, if you're feeling uneasy, trust yourself. Keep your eyes open and don't let anyone pressure you into doing something you're not comfortable with. She gave me a small nod. Yeah, thanks. Over the next couple of days, I noticed Sabrina pulling away from Jared and Mom more and more. She wasn't as enthusiastic about the gala, and she started skipping planning meetings, which didn't go unnoticed. Mom was fuming, complaining to anyone who would listen about how ungrateful Sabrina was being. She doesn't understand how important this is, Mom said during one particularly loud rant in her office. After everything I've done for her, you'd think she'd have a little appreciation. I stayed quiet, knowing anything I said would just make things worse. But inside, I was glad Sabrina was finally starting to see through them. The night before the gala, Sabrina called me again. "I've been thinking about what you said," she said, "and I think you're right. Something's not adding up." "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I'm not going to just go along with whatever Mom and Jared are planning. If they won't tell me the truth, I'll figure it out myself." For the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe Sabrina wasn't as trapped as I'd thought. Maybe she could help me bring the whole thing down. Still, I knew I couldn't count on her completely. She might be questioning things, but that didn't mean she was ready to take a stand. I'd spent years being treated like an outsider in my own family, and I wasn't about to put all my faith in Sabrina now. The gala was less than 24 hours away, and the stage was set. Mom and Jared thought they had everything under control, but they didn't realize how close they were to losing it all. The gala was set to be the event of the year, or at least that's how Mom kept hyping it up. In her eyes, this was more than just a party, it was her crowning achievement. She'd been bragging for weeks about how every important donor, socialite, and local politician would be there. She kept saying it was all to honor Sabrina's incredible contributions. But I knew the real reason. This wasn't about Sabrina, it was about showing off. When I arrived, the venue looked like something out of a movie. The entire place was dripping with excess, sparkling chandeliers, gold-trimmed everything, and centerpieces that probably cost more than my rent. A massive screen was set up on stage, running a slideshow of Sabrina's pictures, her at charity events, her smiling at galas, her posing with donors. It was like a shrine to her, curated to perfection by Mom. The room was packed. People were milling around in expensive outfits, sipping on sparkling drinks and congratulating each other on how charitable they were. It was the kind of crowd that loves to feel good about giving back without ever getting their hands dirty. I spotted Jared almost immediately, laughing with a group of donors like he didn't have a care in the world. Sabrina was by his side, looking as radiant as ever, but there was something different about her tonight. Her usual confidence seemed forced, like she was trying too hard to play the role Mom had assigned her. As I walked through the crowd, I kept my head down, avoiding small talk. I wasn't here to mingle, I was here to end this charade. The evidence Eric and I had gathered was burning a hole in my bag, and I was just waiting for the right moment to blow everything up. About halfway through the evening, the lights dimmed, and Mom took the stage. She was glowing, practically basking in the spotlight as she thanked everyone for coming. "Tonight is a very special night," she began, her voice dripping with pride. "We're here to celebrate the incredible contributions of my only daughter, Sabrina." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment it felt like time stopped. "Only daughter?" I muttered to myself. My blood boiled as the applause erupted around the room. Mom continued, gushing about Sabrina's dedication and how she was the heart and soul of the organization. She made it sound like Sabrina was single-handedly saving the world. I couldn't sit there and let her get away with it. Not this time. I stood up and walked to the center of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The applause was still echoing when I said loudly, "Mom, if Sabrina's your only daughter, why is she unknowingly funding Jared's fraudulent tech company?" The room went dead silent. Every head turned toward me, and for a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat. Mom froze on stage, her smile slipping for just a second before she recovered. "Dana," she said, her tone sharp but measured. "This isn't the time or place for—" "Oh, I think it's the perfect time," I interrupted, my voice steady. "Everyone here deserves to know how their donations are being spent." The moment the words left my mouth, the room practically exploded. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as everyone tried to make sense of what I'd just said. Sabrina stood frozen near the stage, her face a mix of confusion and disbelief. "What is she talking about?" she asked, her voice shaky but loud enough to cut through the noise. Mom, ever the master manipulator, plastered on her tight, strained smile. "Dana," she said, her tone dripping with fake calm, "let's not ruin this beautiful night with your misunderstandings." Misunderstandings? She really thought she could gaslight her way out of this. I couldn't help but laugh, a sharp, humorless sound that drew even more eyes. "Misunderstandings?" I said. "Is that what we're calling funneling donor money into Jared's personal accounts? Sabrina, he's been using you to cover up a multi-million-dollar scam." All eyes turned to Sabrina, who looked like she was about to collapse. She whipped around to face Jared, her voice trembling as she asked, "Tell me she's lying." Jared froze like a deer in headlights. "She doesn't know what she's saying," he stammered, trying and failing to keep his cool. "This is all just some big mistake." I held up the folder in my hand. "Oh, it's no mistake. I have proof, bank records, emails, invoices, everything. It's all here. You two have been stealing from this nonprofit for years." The murmurs grew louder. and a few of the donors in the crowd started pulling out their phones, no doubt ready to Google Jared's company or call their accountants to double-check their donations. Sabrina's gaze shifted to Mom, tears welling up in her eyes. "You knew?" she asked, her voice cracking. Mom, who was finally starting to show cracks in her armor, raised a hand like she was trying to calm her down. "Darling, it's complicated," she began, her tone soft, almost pleading. But Sabrina wasn't having it. "No," she said, taking a step back. "It's simple. You betrayed me, both of you. You made me the face of this nonprofit so you could line your pockets. How could you?" Jared, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, tried to step in. "Sabrina, baby, come on," he said, reaching for her arm. "Don't touch me," she snapped, jerking away from him. At that moment, I almost felt bad for Sabrina. Almost. It was clear she'd been in the dark about everything, and now her entire world was crashing down around her. But I couldn't let sympathy cloud the facts. She'd still been complicit, even if she hadn't known it. Her face was on all the campaigns, her name was tied to every fraudulent program, and whether she liked it or not, she was part of the reason this whole scheme had worked. Meanwhile, the crowd had descended into chaos. People were arguing, whispering, and pointing fingers. A few board members had pushed their way to the front of the room demanding answers. "What is she talking about, Caroline?" one of them asked sharply, addressing Mom. "Is any of this true?" Mom, who was clearly struggling to maintain her composure, waved her hand dismissively. "This is absurd," she said. "Dana's clearly mistaken. She doesn't understand the complexities of running a nonprofit." "Complexities?" I cut in. "Is that what you call laundering money through fake programs? Because I have the documents to prove otherwise." I opened the folder and started passing copies of the evidence to anyone who would take them. Bank statements, fake invoices, wire transfers. It was all there, laid out in black and white. Jared tried to grab one of the papers from a donor, but the man snatched it back. "Don't even think about it," the donor said, glaring at him. At this point, the facade was completely crumbling. Jared's confident, smooth-talking persona was gone, replaced by someone who looked like he was ready to bolt for the nearest exit. Mom was still clinging to the remnants of her control, but even she couldn't deny the mountain of evidence in front of her. As I handed out the last of the documents, Sabrina turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Would you have believed me?" I finally said. She didn't respond, but the look on her face said it all. She wouldn't have. Mom had spent years molding Sabrina into her perfect little puppet, and it was only now, when the strings were cut, that she realized how trapped she'd been. The chaos hit its peak when one of the donors pulled out their phone and started dialing. "Who are you calling?" Jared asked, his voice sharp with panic. "The authorities," the donor replied. "This is fraud. You're going to pay for this." Jared turned to Mom, his voice low but frantic. "We need to get out of here," he hissed. But before they could make a move, two board members stepped in front of them. "You're not going anywhere," one of them said. For the first time in my life, I saw Mom speechless. She looked around the room, her face pale, her carefully crafted world crumbling around her. I stepped back, letting the scene unfold. This wasn't my fight anymore. I'd done my part, and now it was up to the people in the room to decide what happened next. As I watched Mom and Jared squirm under the weight of their own lies, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For years I'd been invisible, pushed to the sidelines while they used Sabrina and the nonprofit to build their empire. But not anymore. This was the beginning of the end for them, and I wasn't going to miss a second of it. If I thought the night couldn't get more dramatic, I was dead wrong. As the crowd erupted into chaos, the sound of doors slamming open cut through the noise. A loud, commanding voice followed. "FBI, everyone, remain where you are." The room froze. It was like someone hit pause on the pandemonium. People turned toward the entrance, where a group of agents in dark jackets with bold yellow lettering moved in with purpose. They weren't here to mingle. I saw one of the agents scan the room before locking eyes on Jared and Mom. "Jared and Caroline," he called out, his voice steady and firm. "We have warrants for your arrest on charges of fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. If there were any lingering doubts about the validity of what I'd said, they were gone now. Jared's face drained of color as two agents approached him. "Wait," he yelled, holding up his hands. "Wait, I can make a deal. I'll cooperate. I'll give you everything." "Shut up," Mom hissed at him, her composure cracking completely. But Jared wasn't done. He pointed at her, his voice rising in panic. It was her idea. She planned everything. Sabrina was just a cover to make it look legit. The room collectively inhaled, and I turned to look at Sabrina. She was standing near the stage, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. This wasn't just betrayal for her. It was a public execution of the image she'd spent her entire life upholding. Mom's face turned icy, her usual calm replaced with a venomous glare aimed directly at Jared. "You pathetic little weasel," she spat. Jared's panic turned into anger. "You're the pathetic one, Caroline," he shot back, his voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're done. You hear me? Done." The agents didn't let the back and forth go on for long. Two of them grabbed Jared by the arms and started leading him toward the door. He tried to resist, stumbling over his own feet as he kept shouting, "I'll talk. I'll tell you everything." Meanwhile, another set of agents closed in on Mom. Unlike Jared, she didn't fight or panic. Instead, she straightened her back, lifted her chin, and stared straight ahead, her lips pressed into a thin line. Even in cuffs, she was trying to maintain control. As they escorted her out, the room erupted into a fresh wave of chaos. Donors were shouting, some demanding explanations, others angrily vowing to pull their funding. A few board members rushed toward Sabrina, who looked like she was about to collapse. I stayed where I was, letting the scene unfold around me. I wasn't about to get in the middle of the mob. One of the agents walked over to me, his expression serious but not unkind. "You're Dana, right?" I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yeah, that's me. We're going to need a statement from you," he said. "But first, I need to know, are there any other key players involved in this?" I glanced at Sabrina. She looked utterly destroyed, her shoulders shaking as she cried silently. "No," I said finally, "it's just them." The agent nodded. "We'll be in touch." As he walked away, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. It was over. The nightmare that had been building for years had finally come crashing down. The next morning, the news was everywhere. Headlines about the nonprofit scandal were plastered across every major outlet. "Prominent nonprofit leaders arrested for fraud and embezzlement," one read. Another, "Mother and boyfriend betray trust, face federal charges." I scrolled through the articles, watching as reporters laid out the entire mess in painstaking detail. The nonprofit's accounts had been frozen, Jared's tech company was under investigation, and the FBI was digging into years of records to trace every dollar they'd stolen. By noon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Friends, coworkers, even distant relatives were texting me, asking if I was okay, if the reports were true, if I knew this was happening. I ignored most of the messages. After everything came crashing down, I thought the dust would settle, but it didn't, not right away. The fallout was brutal and messy. Jared's deal with the FBI meant he sang like a canary. Every scheme, every lie, every fraudulent transaction, he laid it all out. His testimony, combined with the evidence Eric and I had collected, made the case airtight. Mom didn't go down without a fight, of course. She tried to spin her usual narrative, painting herself as the victim. "I did what I had to do to save the nonprofit," she told the press in her final interview before the trial. "I was under immense pressure. It was nonsense, and everyone knew it." The court saw right through her excuses, especially when Jared's testimony directly implicated her as the mastermind. In the end, she was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Jared, being the rat he is, got a lighter sentence, 5 years in exchange for his full cooperation. I'm sure he thinks he got off easy, but his reputation is ruined. No one in the business world will touch him with a 10-foot pole now. Sabrina took the betrayal hard. She was devastated, not just by what Mom and Jared had done, but by how blind she'd been to all of it. For years, she'd been the face of their scam without ever realizing she was being used. It was like her entire life up to that point had been ripped out from under her. At first, she disappeared. I didn't hear from her for weeks after the trial. But then, one day, she showed up at my door, looking exhausted and defeated. "I don't know who I am without them," she admitted. It was one of the rawest moments I'd ever seen from her. Sabrina, who had always been so polished and perfect, finally let her guard down. "You don't have to be anything for anyone anymore," I told her. "Figure out who you are for yourself." It wasn't an overnight change, but little by little she started piecing herself back together. She cut off all ties with Mom and Jared, refusing to even visit Mom in prison. "She doesn't deserve my forgiveness," Sabrina said. As Sabrina and I spent more time together, I realized something surprising. We had more in common than I'd thought. For years, Mom had pitted us against each other, making us feel like we were competing for her approval. But now that she was out of the picture, there was no competition, just two sisters trying to make sense of the mess we'd been left with. One night, over takeout and bad TV, we started talking about what we wanted to do next. The nonprofit was gone, dissolved as part of the legal fallout, but there were still people out there who'd been counting on its programs. "We could just start over," I said. Sabrina looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we could build something new, something real this time." She hesitated. "Do you think anyone would trust us after everything that happened?" "They trusted Mom," I said, "and she used them. If we're honest and transparent from the start, maybe we can rebuild that trust." Eric was immediately on board when I pitched the idea. "It's about time something good came out of this mess," he said. The three of us spent months planning and brainstorming, trying to figure out how to create an organization that would actually make a difference. Transparency became our guiding principle. Every dollar donated would be accounted for, with detailed breakdowns available to the public. We decided to focus on scholarships and mentorship programs for women in underserved communities, programs that Mom had always claimed to support but never actually funded. Sabrina threw herself into the project with a determination I'd never seen before. She reached out to former donors, apologizing for what had happened and asking for their trust. Some slammed the door in her face, but others were willing to give us a second chance. Meanwhile, Eric and I worked on building the infrastructure, setting up bank accounts, filing the paperwork to become a registered nonprofit, and creating a website that laid everything bare. The first time we awarded a scholarship, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Not the hollow, performative kind of pride Mom used to push on us, but real, genuine pride in what we were doing. Sabrina and I sat in the front row at the ceremony, watching as a young woman named Tasha accepted her award. She was the first in her family to go to college, and she was planning to study engineering. "This is because of you," Sabrina whispered to me as we applauded. "No," I said, "this is because of us." It was a small moment, but it meant everything. For the first time, I felt like we were finally free from Mom's shadow. The nonprofit grew slowly but steadily. We weren't pulling in the kind of money Mom's organization had, but we didn't need to. What we lacked in flash, we made up for in authenticity. Sabrina became the public face of the organization, but this time, it was different. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was actively involved, working with mentors and scholarship recipients, building relationships with donors, and ensuring that every program was running smoothly. Eric and I stayed behind the scenes, managing the logistics and keeping the finances airtight. After everything we'd been through, we weren't about to let a single penny go unaccounted for. Every so often, I think about Mom. She's still in prison, probably blaming everyone but herself for what happened. Jared is out by now, though I have no idea where he is, and I honestly don't care. What I do care about is what we've built from the ashes of their empire. Mom spent her life chasing control, clinging to power at any cost, and in the end, it destroyed her. But Sabrina and I were free. Free to be ourselves. Free to build something good. Free to live without the weight of Mom's expectations. The gala, the scandal, the fallout. It all feels like a lifetime ago now. But I'll never forget it. Because that night was the turning point. It was the night we stopped being pawns in Mom's game and started writing our own story. And that gala? It was the night everything fell apart, but it was also the night we found the strength to start over. From the ashes of her corruption, we built something real, something honest. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're finally doing something that matters.